The massive conference hall aboard the diplomatic ship Serenity's Dawn buzzed with quiet conversation. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered for the annual Galactic Confederation Folklore Symposium. The ship itself was a masterpiece of peaceful engineering, its curved walls decorated with art from 1,000 worlds and its atmosphere carefully balanced to accommodate the breathing needs of dozens of different life forms. Ambassador Vextai of the Althari Republic stood at the central podium, her blue-scaled skin shimmering under the soft lights. Her forearms gestured gracefully as she spoke, a habit that helped her audience follow her words through the universal translators they all wore. Today I wish to share with you the most fascinating collection of myths from the Outer Rim territories, she announced. These stories have been passed down for over 300 years, and they all center around a single, supposedly extinct species. A few delegates leaned forward with interest. The Zentari military attaché, Admiral Kethmore, made a sound that his translator rendered as a polite cough. His insect-like features showed mild amusement. The species in question, Vextai continued, called themselves humans. According to the legends, they originated from a small blue world in what we now call the Sol system, far in the Outer Rim. The stories describe them as bipedal mammals, roughly 2 meters tall, with only 2 arms and no natural armor or weapons. Several delegates exchanged glances. The peaceful Nexari captain, Yilara, tilted her head in the way her species showed curiosity. If they had no natural defenses, how did they become the subject of warrior myths? Vextai's translation device picked up what might have been laughter. That is exactly what makes these stories so interesting. The humans were supposedly weak individually, yet the myths claim they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy when they worked together. She activated a holographic display that showed primitive spacecraft designs recovered from ancient databases. The ships looked crude and angular, nothing like the elegant curves preferred by civilized species. According to the legends, humans had a unique approach to technology. While other species developed tools for specific purposes, humans apparently had a saying, "Everything is a weapon if you think about it hard enough." The stories claim they could turn mining equipment into warships, cargo containers into missiles, and communication arrays into jamming devices. Dr. Thexan, the lead xenobiologist from the academic world of Kepler Prime, made notes on his tablet. His tentacles moved quickly across the surface as he recorded the details. These sound like typical warrior culture exaggerations. Many primitive species develop myths about turning common objects into weapons. Perhaps, Vextai agreed, but the human myths go much further. They describe a species that didn't just fight wars, they apparently turned warfare itself into a science. The stories mention concepts like combined arms doctrine, tactical flexibility, and strategic paranoia. Our translation systems can barely process some of these terms. Admiral Kethmore's mandibles clicked in what his translator called skepticism. Paranoia is hardly a military virtue. No successful civilization builds its strategy on fear and suspicion. The human myths suggest otherwise, Vextai replied. According to the stories, humans believed that the best way to avoid war was to be extremely good at fighting it. They supposedly maintained massive military forces during peacetime, not for conquest, but to discourage potential enemies from attacking in the first place. Captain Yalara's pale features showed confusion. But that makes no sense. Military forces are expensive and dangerous. Why would any species waste resources on weapons they didn't intend to use? The myths claim that humans had another saying, Vextai said, "Si vis pacem para bellum." Our linguists believe it means if you want peace, prepare for war. The humans apparently believed that strength prevented conflict rather than causing it. The assembled delegates murmured among themselves. The concept was alien to most of them. The Galactic Confederation had maintained peace for over 2 centuries through diplomacy, cultural exchange, and mutual economic dependence. The idea of preparing for war to prevent it seemed backwards. Dr. Thexan raised one of his tentacles. What happened to these mythical humans? If they were as militarily successful as the stories claim, why did they disappear? That's the mystery, Vextai admitted. The stories simply end. About 300 years ago, all contact with the Outer Rim territories ceased. Some scholars believe the humans destroyed themselves in a civil war. Others think they were conquered by some unknown enemy. A few romantic academics suggest they simply left our galaxy entirely. Or, Admiral Kethmore interjected, they never existed at all. These stories have all the hallmarks of cautionary tales designed to keep young people from exploring dangerous territory. Don't go to the Outer Rim, children, or the scary humans will turn your ship into a weapon and use it against you. The conference hall filled with the various sounds that different species made when they found something amusing. The Althari delegates created a musical humming, while the Zentari produced rapid clicking noises. Even the normally serious academic representatives seemed entertained by the Admiral's comment. Vextai was about to respond when her personal communicator chimed urgently. She glanced at the device and her blue scales immediately shifted to a darker shade, a sign of concern among her people. I'm sorry, delegates, but I'm receiving priority communications from Confederation Central Command, she announced. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. But before anyone could move, the ship's general alarm began sounding. The pleasant conference lighting was replaced by the harsh red glow of emergency illumination. Captain Ylara was already speaking, rapidly into her own communicator, her normally calm demeanor showing signs of strain. All delegates, please remain calm, the ship's AI announced through the translation system. We are receiving urgent reports from long-range sensor stations in the Outer Rim territories. Multiple massive energy signatures have been detected in the Saul system. A sudden silence fell over the conference hall. Every delegate turned to look at Vextai, who was still holding her holographic display of primitive human spacecraft designs. Captain Ylara finished her conversation and addressed the room. Ladies, gentlemen, and respected entities, I've just received a full report from Confederation Fleet Command. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected what appears to be large-scale industrial activity in the Sol system. The energy signatures are consistent with massive spacecraft construction and movement. Dr. Thexon's tentacles stopped moving across his tablet. The Sol system, but that's the mythical human homeworld, Vextai finished. According to our sensors, something is building ships there. Lots of ships. Admiral Kethamore's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the information. What kind of ships? Are we looking at exploration vessels, mining platforms? Captain Ylara consulted her communicator again. The energy signatures are unusual. The propulsion systems appear to be crude fusion drives, but they're powerful enough to move very large vessels. The construction techniques seem primitive by our standards, but the sheer scale of the operation is impressive. How many ships are we talking about? Asked Dr. Thexon. The initial count is over 2,000 vessels of various sizes, Captain Ylara replied. And the number keeps growing. Whatever's happening in the Sol system, it's been going on for quite some time. Ambassador Vextai deactivated her holographic display with one of her four hands, while using another to adjust her translator settings. Council members, I think we may need to revise our understanding of human mythology. Admiral Kethamore stood, his impressive height making him tower over most of the other delegates. Or we're looking at pirates using the Sol system as a base of operations. Abandoned systems are perfect for illegal shipbuilding. The energy signatures probably belong to criminals using stolen technology. That's possible, Captain Ylara agreed. But the scale suggests something much larger than typical piracy. We're looking at an industrial operation that would require millions of workers and enormous resources. Which brings us back to the humans, Vextai said quietly. According to the myths, they had a population of several billion on their homeworld alone. If even a fraction of them survived whatever happened 300 years ago. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications hung in the air like an unspoken threat. If the human myths were true, if they really were as militarily capable as the stories claimed, then the galaxy might be facing something unprecedented. Dr. Thexon was the first to break the silence. What does Confederation Fleet Command recommend? Captain Ylara checked her communicator one more time. They're assembling an investigation fleet. Nothing too large. We don't want to appear threatening if we're dealing with a previously unknown species. The mission will be to make contact and assess the situation. And if we find humans, asked Ambassador Vextai. Then we follow standard first contact protocols, Captain Yalara replied. We approach peacefully, exchange information, and determine whether they're interested in joining the Confederation. Admiral Kethmore's translation device registered something that might have been doubt. And if they're not interested in peace? The question hung in the air unanswered. The Galactic Confederation had never encountered a species that wasn't interested in peaceful coexistence. The benefits of joining the galactic community were so obvious that every discovered civilization had eventually chosen to participate. Captain Yalara was quiet for a moment before responding. Then we'll deal with that situation when we encounter it, but let's not borrow trouble. For all we know, we'll find a peaceful civilization that's simply been rebuilding after some natural disaster. As the delegates began filing out of the conference hall to return to their quarters, Ambassador Vextai remained behind, staring at her now blank holographic display. The myths she had been sharing just minutes before suddenly seemed less like entertaining folklore and more like intelligence reports from a forgotten war. She activated her personal communicator and sent a priority message to the Althari High Council. The subject line was simple. Human myths may require immediate reassessment. In the depths of space, automated sensor stations continued their silent watch over the Saul system. The energy signatures they detected grew stronger by the hour, and the number of active spacecraft continued to climb. Whatever was happening in that distant star system, it was accelerating. The age of human mythology was coming to an end. What would replace it remained to be seen. 3 days later, the Confederation investigation fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Saul system. Captain Yalara stood on the bridge of the Harmony of Worlds, watching the main display with growing amazement. What she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about spacefaring civilizations. The system was alive with activity. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the third planet, the blue world mentioned in the human myths. These weren't the elegant ring structures that most advanced species preferred, but rough industrial complexes that looked like they had been built by engineers who cared more about function than beauty. Analysis complete, Captain, reported Lieutenant Zexai, the ship's science officer. His reptilian features showed confusion as he read from his instruments. I'm detecting hundreds of shipyards, manufacturing facilities, and what appear to be defensive platforms. The construction style is unlike anything in our databases. Captain Yalara moved closer to examine the readings. What about the ships themselves? Over 3,000 vessels detected so far, Zexai replied. They range from small fighters to massive carriers. The design philosophy is unusual. The main screen zoomed in on one of the larger human vessels. It looked like someone had taken a cargo hauler and covered it with armor plating and weapons. Gun turrets sprouted from every available surface, and the hull was painted in a dark gray that absorbed sensor beams. They certainly don't believe in hiding their military capabilities, observed Commander Thelix, the ship's diplomatic officer. Her crystalline body shimmered as she spoke, a sign of nervousness among her people. No, they don't, Captain Yalara agreed. Send a standard first contact signal on all frequencies. Let them know we come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations. The response came within seconds, much faster than most species managed. A clear, strong signal in perfect galactic standard reached the Harmony of Worlds. Unknown vessel, this is Earth Defense Control. Welcome to the Saul system. Please maintain your current position while we arrange for official contact. A representative will meet with you shortly. Lieutenant Zexai looked up from his console in surprise. Captain, they're speaking fluent galactic standard. How is that possible? This is supposed to be first contact. Captain Yalara frowned. How long have they been monitoring our communications? Before anyone could answer, the tactical officer, Ensign Krelma, spoke up urgently. Captain, I'm detecting multiple small craft approaching our position. They appear to be escort fighters. The main screen switched to show a formation of 12 sleek fighters moving toward them in a perfect diamond pattern. Unlike the larger ships they had seen, these fighters were clearly built for speed and maneuverability. They also carried an impressive array of weapons for their size. Standard escort formation, Commander Thelix observed. They're being cautious, but not threatening. Open a channel to the lead fighter, Captain Yillara ordered. Channel open, Captain. Earth defense fighters, this is Captain Yillara of the Confederation vessel Harmony of Worlds. We appreciate your escort. Copy that, Harmony of Worlds, came the reply. The voice was crisp and professional, with an accent that the translation system couldn't quite process. I'm Flight Leader Martinez. My squadron will escort you to Checkpoint Alpha, where you'll meet with our diplomatic team. As the fighters took position around the Confederation ship, Captain Yillara couldn't help but notice their precise movements. Each pilot maintained perfect spacing and formation discipline. It was the mark of extensive training and experience. Flight Leader Martinez, she said, may I ask how long your people have been aware of the Galactic Confederation? There was a brief pause before the human pilot replied. That's a question for the diplomats, Captain. I'm just here to make sure everyone gets where they're going safely. The escort proceeded to a neutral meeting point, a small space station. That definitely hadn't been there 3 days ago. It was clearly human construction, built with the same functional aesthetic as everything else they had seen. The station was heavily armed and looked like it could defend itself against a significant attack. Impressive, Commander Thelix commented. They built a diplomatic facility in 3 days. That suggests remarkable construction capabilities. Or, they had it ready and waiting, Captain Yillara replied thoughtfully. The question is, waiting for what? The Harmony of Worlds docked at the station without incident. Captain Yillara selected a small diplomatic team and prepared to meet the humans face-to-face. As they walked through the docking tube, she noticed that even the station's corridors were built like fortifications, with thick walls and multiple security checkpoints. The meeting room was sparse but functional, with a large table and chairs, designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. The humans were already waiting when the Confederation delegation arrived. Captain Yillara got her first close look at the mythical species. They were exactly as the stories described, bipedal, mammals with only 2 arms and no visible natural weapons. They looked remarkably fragile compared to most spacefaring species, but there was something about their posture and the way they moved that suggested they were anything but helpless. Even in this peaceful setting, they carried themselves like soldiers. Welcome to the Saul system, said the lead human, a woman with short dark hair and intelligent eyes. I'm Commander Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Thank you for coming to meet with us. Captain Yillara performed the standard Confederation greeting, a gesture that her translator explained to the humans. Thank you for hosting us, Commander Chen. I'm Captain Yillara of the vessel Harmony of Worlds. We're honored to make first contact with your species. Commander Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested amusement. First, contact? Captain, we've been monitoring Confederation communications for over 30 years. We know all about your organization, your member species, and your territories. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Commander Thelix's crystalline body flickered with surprise. You've been watching us? Why didn't you make contact sooner? We wanted to understand what we were dealing with, Commander Chen replied, simply. Your Confederation values peace and cooperation. Those are admirable goals. But we needed to know if you were capable of defending them. Lieutenant Zexhai spoke up. Defending them from what? Commander Chen gestured to a wall display that showed a map of the galaxy. Large red areas marked territories that the Confederation databases listed as unexplored or uninhabitable. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Lieutenant. Your Confederation controls maybe 30% of habitable systems. What do you think lives in the other 70%? Captain Yillara studied the map. Our exploration teams have found no evidence of hostile civilizations in those regions. Your exploration teams haven't been looking hard enough, Commander, Chen said quietly. Or maybe they haven't been looking in the right places. She touched a control, and the map zoomed in on a cluster of systems near the galactic rim. 3 months ago, 17 worlds in this sector went silent. Total communication blackout. What's your explanation for that? The Confederation officers exchanged glances. Captain Ylara felt a chill run through her. We haven't received any reports about missing colonies. Because they weren't Confederation colonies, Commander Chen replied. They belonged to independent species that hadn't joined your organization yet, species that are now extinct. Commander Thelik's body stopped shimmering entirely, a sign of shock among her people. Extinct? What happened to them? The same thing that's been happening to non-aligned species for the past 50 years, Commander Chen said. They were conquered, enslaved, or destroyed by something the survivors call the Hegemony. She brought up new images on the display. Grainy sensor readings and blurry photographs that showed massive alien warships with organic curves and weapon systems that seemed to blend technology with biology. The Krillian hegemony has been expanding steadily for decades, Commander Chen continued. They target isolated worlds first, places that can't call for help. Your Confederation's policy of non-interference has left thousands of species defenseless. Captain Ylara felt defensive. We don't interfere because we respect the sovereignty of independent worlds. We can't force species to accept our protection. No, but you could have warned them about the threat, Commander Chen replied. You could have offered defensive alliances to species that wanted to remain independent. Instead, you focused on your core territories and ignored the outer rim. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. The Confederation had indeed focused on maintaining peace among its member worlds, rather than expanding or actively defending non-members. What do you want from us, Commander? Captain Ylara asked directly. Commander Chen leaned back in her chair. We want to know if you're willing to fight for your ideals when talking isn't enough. The hegemony is moving toward Confederation space. In 6 months, maybe less, they'll reach your outer colonies. When that happens, will you defend them? Of course we will, Commander Thelik said immediately. The Confederation has defensive forces, exploration ships with light armaments. Commander Chen interrupted. Science vessels with emergency weapons. Police forces designed to handle pirates and smugglers. You don't have a military commander. You have a very well-equipped Coast Guard. Lieutenant Zexhai looked uncomfortable. Are you saying we can't defend ourselves? I'm saying you've never had to, Commander Chen replied. Your entire civilization is built on the assumption that everyone wants peace. What happens when you meet someone who doesn't? Captain Ylara was quiet for a long moment. What would you suggest? For the first time since the meeting began, Commander Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. We suggest you let us show you what humans do best, she said. We've been preparing for this war for 30 years. We've built ships, trained crews, and developed tactics specifically designed to stop the hegemony. And what do you want in return? Captain Ylara asked. Recognition, Commander Chen said simply. A place in the galactic community for humanity. Trade agreements, technological exchange, mutual defense treaties. The same things any species wants when they join a larger civilization. That seems reasonable, Commander Thelik said. But why the military buildup? Why prepare for war instead of seeking diplomatic solutions? Commander Chen's smile faded. Because we've seen what the hegemony does to species that try to negotiate with them. We've listened to the final transmissions from worlds that tried diplomacy. We know what's coming, and we know that the only language the hegemony understands is force. She stood and walked to the window that looked out at the Earth orbital facilities. Your Confederation has created something beautiful, a community of species working together for mutual benefit. But beauty needs protection in a dangerous universe. Captain Ylara joined her at the window. And you think humanity can provide that protection? We think humanity can teach you to protect yourselves, Commander Chen corrected. The hegemony is coming whether we're ready or not. The question is whether the galaxy will still have a confederation when they arrive. 6 months after first contact with humanity, the worst fears of Commander Chen proved to be terrifyingly accurate. The Krillian hegemony struck without warning across 17 star systems simultaneously, catching the Galactic Confederation, completely unprepared for coordinated warfare on such a massive scale. Admiral Kethmore stood in the Emergency Command Center on Confederation Central, watching the tactical displays with growing horror. Each screen showed another system under attack, another world crying for help that he couldn't provide. "Status report," he ordered, his mandibles clicking with stress. Captain Veltar, his aide, consulted her datapad with trembling hands. "New. Harmony fell 6 hours ago. The Hegemony forces bypassed our defensive stations entirely and targeted the civilian population centers first. By the time our ships could respond, they had over 2 million hostages." "What about the Kepler colonies?" "Same pattern, sir. They hit the schools, hospitals, and residential areas before our forces could evacuate them. Our captains are reporting that they can't engage the enemy ships without risking massive civilian casualties." Admiral Kethamore slammed his fist against the command table. The Hegemony's strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. By targeting civilians first, they forced Confederation military units to divide their attention between fighting and rescue operations. "How many refugees are we dealing with?" "Current estimates suggest over 15 million displaced beings across all affected systems," Captain Veltar replied. "Our emergency services are completely overwhelmed." The main screen switched to show footage from the Althari colony of Sapphire Bay. The once beautiful crystal cities were burning, their elegant spires reduced to glowing slag by Hegemony weapons. Streams of refugees fled toward the spaceports, carrying whatever possessions they could manage. "The Hegemony ships are unlike anything we've encountered," reported Dr. Thexan, who had been analyzing the enemy vessels. "They appear to use some kind of biomechanical technology. The ships actually heal themselves when damaged, and their weapons seem to adapt to our defensive systems." Admiral Kethmore turned to study the tactical readouts. "What are our fleet? Losses?" "Severe," Captain Veltar admitted. "The Peaceful Dawn was destroyed defending the civilian evacuation from New Kepler. The Harmony's voice suffered critical damage and had to withdraw. We've lost 12 ships in the past 8 hours. "And enemy casualties?" "Unknown, sir. Our weapons seem to have minimal effect on their biomechanical hulls. Even when we score direct hits, their ships regenerate the damage within minutes." The Admiral's translation device registered what might have been despair. The Confederation fleet had been designed for exploration and peacekeeping, not warfare against an enemy that seemed immune to conventional weapons. "Sir?" Captain Veltar said quietly. "We're receiving priority communications from the Saul system. The humans are requesting immediate consultation." Admiral Kethamore had been dreading this moment. Commander Chen had warned them about the Hegemony threat, but he had hoped diplomacy might still provide a solution. Now, with millions of beings dead or displaced, it was clear that the humans had been right about everything. "Put them through," he ordered. The main screen switched to show Commander Chen, now wearing the uniform of an admiral. She was standing in what appeared to be a military command center, surrounded by displays showing fleet movements and tactical data. "Admiral Kethmore," she said without preamble, "we've been monitoring the Hegemony attacks. How bad is it?" "Catastrophic," he replied honestly. "They hit us simultaneously across 17 systems. Our forces can't engage them effectively without causing massive civilian casualties." "That's their standard opening strategy," Admiral Chen said. "They use hostages as human shields while they establish forward bases. Once they're entrenched, they'll start the systematic conquest of your core worlds." "Can you help us?" Admiral Kethamore asked, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "We can stop them," Admiral Chen replied. "But we need full tactical control of the operation. No second-guessing, no political interference, and no attempts to negotiate with the enemy while the battle is ongoing." Dr. Thexan leaned forward. "Admiral Chen, surely there must be some diplomatic solution. The Hegemony must want something. We can offer them." Admiral Chen's expression hardened. "Doctor, the Hegemony doesn't negotiate. They conquer. Their entire culture is based on the belief that might makes right, and that weaker species exist only to serve stronger ones. They've exterminated dozens of civilizations, and they'll do the same to the Confederation unless someone stops them." "What do you need from us?" Admiral Kethmore asked. "Immediate authorization to engage Hegemony forces in Confederation space," Admiral Chen replied, "and access to your emergency communication networks so we can coordinate with your civilian evacuation efforts." Admiral Kethmore looked around the command center at his staff. Every face showed the same mixture of fear and desperate hope. The Confederation had never been in a situation like this, and all their traditional solutions had proven inadequate. "You have full authorization," he said finally. "What's your plan?" Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Kethmore felt a spark of hope. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the expression of someone who had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. "We're going to give the Hegemony something they've never encountered before," she said. "An enemy that fights back." The human fleet that emerged from the Saul system 3 hours later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where Confederation ships were elegant curves and polished surfaces, human vessels looked like they had been built in scrapyards by engineers who expected to fight their way through hell. Every ship bristled with weapons. Even the smallest human fighters carried more firepower than many Confederation cruisers. The larger vessels looked more like mobile fortresses than spacecraft, with multiple layers of armor and redundant weapon systems. But it wasn't just the ships that impressed the Confederation observers. It was the way the humans organized their fleet. Instead of the loose formations preferred by most species, the human ships moved in tight, coordinated groups that could concentrate their firepower on specific targets. "Admiral," Captain Veltar reported from her monitoring station, "the human fleet has reached the Kepler system. They're requesting all available data on Hegemony ship positions and civilian evacuation status." "Send them everything we have," Admiral Kethmore ordered. The main screen switched to show the tactical situation in the Kepler system. The Hegemony had established orbital positions around 3 planets, using their biomechanical ships to create defensive barriers around the civilian population centers they had captured. "Standard Hegemony fortress configuration." Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system. "They're daring us to attack them while they hold the civilians hostage." "So what do we do?" Admiral Kethmore asked. "We show them why that's a mistake," Admiral Chen replied. The human attack began with something the Confederation had never seen before: coordinated electronic warfare. Human ships launched clouds of small drones that immediately began jamming Hegemony communications and sensor systems. The organic enemy vessels began to move erratically as their coordination broke down. Then came the fighters. Human pilots flew in formations that seemed almost choreographed, weaving through defensive fire while launching precision strikes at specific points on the Hegemony ships. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy vessels, outright they targeted weapon systems and propulsion units. "They're not going for kills," Dr. Thexan observed with amazement. "They're disabling the ships while avoiding the areas where civilians are being held." The larger human ships moved into position with mechanical precision. Instead of engaging in the individual duels that characterized most space combat, they concentrated their fire on single targets, overwhelming the Hegemony's regenerative abilities through sheer volume of firepower. But the most impressive part of the human operation was happening away from the main battle. Specialized human ships, vessels that looked like heavily armed cargo haulers, were moving toward the planets where civilians were being held hostage. "What are those ships doing?" Captain Veltar asked. "Tactical extraction," Admiral Chen replied. "We're not leaving anyone behind." The extraction ships landed near the civilian detention centers while the space battle raged overhead. Human ground forces wearing powered armor that made them look like mechanical warriors stormed the facilities with precision that spoke of extensive training. "How are they moving so fast?" Admiral Kethmore wondered aloud. "Practice," Admiral Chen said simply. "We've run this operation 1,000 times in simulations. Every possible Hegemony tactic, every type of civilian hostage situation. My people know exactly what to do." Within 6 hours, the Battle of Kepler was over. The Hegemony fleet had been completely destroyed or disabled, and every civilian hostage had been rescued. The human casualties were remarkably light, fewer than 50 killed across the entire operation. But Admiral Kethmore knew this was just the beginning. The Hegemony had suffered a major defeat, but they controlled hundreds of star systems and commanded fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands. "Admiral Chen," he said, "this was impressive, but the Hegemony will retaliate. They'll send much larger forces next time. Yes, they will, Admiral Chen agreed. Which is why we need to take the fight to them before they can reorganize. You want to invade Hegemony territory? I want to end this war before it destroys half the galaxy, Admiral Chen replied. The Hegemony has been expanding for decades by conquering isolated worlds and weak civilizations. They've never faced an enemy that was prepared for them. Admiral, Kethmore felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. What are you proposing? Total war, Admiral Chen said without hesitation. We're going to hit every Hegemony stronghold simultaneously. We're going to destroy their shipyards, liberate their slave worlds, and show the galaxy that tyranny has consequences. But the cost will be much less than the cost of letting them continue, Admiral Chen interrupted. Admiral, the Hegemony has enslaved or exterminated over 200 species. They're not going to stop until someone makes them stop. Admiral Kethmore was quiet for a long moment. Everything about human military thinking went against Confederation principles of minimal force and diplomatic solutions, but the results spoke for themselves. The Hegemony had been decisively defeated with minimal civilian casualties. What do you need from us? He asked finally. Time, Admiral Chen replied, and trust. Give us 6 months to prepare, and we'll give you a galaxy where species like yours can exist in peace. As the communication ended, Admiral Kethmore looked around his command center. The emergency displays were already showing new Hegemony movements, fleets repositioning, reinforcements being called up from reserve systems. The enemy was preparing for a much larger war. But for the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Kethmore felt something he hadn't expected to feel again. Hope. The humans had done something the Confederation thought impossible. They had defeated the Hegemony in open battle while protecting every civilian. If they could do it once, maybe they could do it again, and maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would survive this war after all. The massive human fleet assembled at the Kepler's stand system looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. Over 400 ships of various sizes floated in perfect formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that seemed to have been designed by engineers who expected to fight against impossible odds. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, watching the final preparations for what she knew would be the decisive battle of the war. Around her, human officers worked with the calm efficiency that came from months of intensive training and preparation. Status report, she ordered. Commander Williams, her tactical officer, consulted his displays. All ships report ready for combat operations. Fighter squadrons are loaded and armed. Ground assault teams are standing by. What about our Confederation? Allies? Admiral Kethmore's fleet is holding position at coordinates 77 Alpha. They have 43 ships, mostly cruisers and support vessels. Admiral Chen nodded. The Confederation had insisted on participating in the operation, despite their ships being poorly equipped for major combat. She respected their courage, even if she worried about their effectiveness. Ma'am, reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, we're receiving final intelligence updates from our reconnaissance drones. The main screen switched to show the Hegemony stronghold at Kepler's stand. It was a massive fortress, system built around 3 heavily fortified worlds with defensive platforms that could house thousands of biomechanical ships. Analysis? Admiral Chen asked. Commander Williams highlighted key points on the display. The Hegemony has concentrated approximately 8,000 combat vessels in the system. They're arranged in standard defensive formations around their 3 fortress worlds. They're expecting us to attack the fortresses directly, Admiral Chen observed. Standard siege warfare. That appears to be their assumption, Commander Williams agreed. Our intelligence suggests they've positioned their strongest ships to defend the orbital platforms. Admiral Chen smiled grimly. Then we're going to disappoint them. Initiate Operation Sledgehammer. What happened next demonstrated why humans had become the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Instead of attacking the heavily defended fortress, the human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups and struck at targets throughout the system simultaneously. Human fighters operating in coordinated squadrons swept through the outer defensive perimeter like schools of deadly fish. They didn't engage in individual duels with enemy ships. They attacked in groups, concentrating their firepower to destroy targets quickly and efficiently. But the real shock came from the human capital ships. Instead of the elegant long-range battles preferred by most species, human warships closed to point-blank range and unleashed devastating firepower at close quarters. "They're using ramming tactics," reported Captain Veltar from the Confederation observation vessel. "The human ships are actually colliding with hegemony vessels." "Not ramming," Admiral Kethmore corrected, studying the tactical displays more carefully. "Boarding." The human ships were indeed making contact with enemy vessels, but they weren't trying to destroy them through collision. Specialized boarding pods launched from the human ships and attached themselves to hegemony hulls like mechanical parasites. "What are they doing?" Dr. Thexan asked from his position at the science station. The answer came as explosions began blooming throughout the hegemony biomechanical ships. Human boarding parties were fighting their way through the enemy vessels, targeting critical systems from the inside. "It's brilliant," Admiral Kethmore realized. "The hegemony ships are designed to regenerate damage from the outside, but they can't repair internal systems while they're being destroyed from within." The battle quickly turned into a nightmare for the hegemony forces. Their carefully planned defensive formations fell apart as human boarding parties systematically disabled their command and control systems. Ships that should have been coordinating, their defense instead found themselves fighting individual battles for survival. But Admiral Chen wasn't content with simply defeating the enemy fleet. As hegemony vessels began surrendering or fleeing, human ships moved toward the fortress worlds themselves. "Admiral," Commander Williams reported, "we're receiving surrender offers from the fortress commanders. They're requesting terms." "Standard liberation protocol," Admiral Chen replied without hesitation. "All hegemony military personnel are to be disarmed and detained. All slave populations are to be freed immediately. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force." The liberation of the three fortress worlds revealed the true horror of hegemony rule. Massive slave camps held millions of beings from dozens of different species, all working under conditions that would have been considered criminal anywhere in the Confederation. Human ground forces, supported by Confederation humanitarian teams, began the massive task of processing refugees and providing medical care to beings who had been enslaved for years or even decades. "Admiral Chen," Admiral Kethmore called from his ship, "we're finding evidence of systematic extermination programs on the Second World. The hegemony has been killing any species they considered genetically inferior." Admiral Chen's expression darkened. "Document everything. The galaxy needs to see what we're fighting against." The most shocking discovery came on the Third World, where human intelligence teams found massive archives containing the hegemony's long-term expansion plans. The documents revealed an empire that intended to conquer the entire galaxy, with specific timetables for the destruction of every non-hegemony species. They weren't just planning to conquer the Confederation, Dr. Thexan reported after reviewing the files. They were planning to exterminate every species that couldn't be enslaved effectively. Admiral Chen studied the intelligence reports with growing anger. "How many species have they already destroyed?" "According to these records, over 400 distinct civilizations have been eliminated in the past century," Dr. Thexan replied. "Most of them never had the chance to call for help." The strategic implications were staggering. The hegemony wasn't just an aggressive empire. They were conducting genocide on a galactic scale, systematically eliminating entire species to make room for their own expansion. "This information needs to reach every civilized world in the galaxy," Admiral Kethmore said. "Species that have been neutral in this conflict need to understand what they're really facing." But Admiral Chen was already planning the next phase of the war. The victory at Kepler's stand had been decisive, but the hegemony still controlled hundreds of star systems and millions of enslaved beings. "Commander Williams," she ordered, "initiate Phase 2 operations. I want simultaneous strikes against every major hegemony stronghold within 50 light-years of this position." "Ma'am, that's over 30 systems. We don't have enough ships for that many operations." "We don't need to occupy every system," Admiral Chen explained. We just need to demonstrate that nowhere in hegemony space is safe from retaliation. What followed was a campaign unlike anything in galactic history. Human task forces struck deep into hegemony territory, targeting shipyards, supply depots, and command centers. They moved too fast for the enemy to coordinate a response, hitting multiple targets before disappearing back into hyperspace. The psychological effect was devastating. The hegemony, which had built its empire on fear and intimidation, suddenly found itself on the defensive. Slave worlds began to revolt when they realized that liberation was possible. "Admiral," reported Commander Williams, "we're receiving communications from 17 different systems. Local populations are requesting assistance in overthrowing their hegemony occupiers." "Grant all requests," Admiral Chen ordered. "Deploy liberation teams to every system that asks for help." Admiral Kethmore, observing the campaign from the Confederation fleet, was amazed by the scope of the human operation. "Admiral Chen, how are you coordinating all these simultaneous operations? The logistics alone should be impossible." "Human military doctrine emphasizes decentralized command," Admiral Chen explained. "Every ship captain, every ground commander, knows the overall mission objectives. They don't need detailed orders from headquarters. They just need the freedom to accomplish their assigned goals." The concept was alien to most galactic civilizations, which preferred centralized control and detailed planning, but the results spoke for themselves. Human forces were achieving objectives faster than the hegemony could respond to threats. Within 6 weeks, the tide of war had turned completely. The hegemony's outer territories were in revolt. Their supply lines had been cut and their leadership was fragmented by constant attacks on their command structure. "Admiral," Commander Williams reported, "we're receiving a priority communication from Hegemony Central Command. They're requesting a ceasefire." Admiral Chen's expression showed no mercy. "Terms: complete withdrawal from all conquered territories, release of all enslaved populations, and war crimes tribunals for their leadership." "Acceptable, but incomplete," Admiral Chen replied. "Add full reparations to the species they've harmed, supervised disarmament of their military forces, and mandatory monitoring to prevent future aggression." Admiral Kethmore interrupted the conversation. "Admiral Chen, those terms are essentially unconditional surrender. The hegemony will never accept them." "Then they'll face complete destruction," Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Admiral, the hegemony has committed genocide against over 400 species. They've enslaved millions of beings and plan to exterminate every free civilization in the galaxy. This isn't a territorial dispute. This is a war for the survival of galactic civilization itself." She turned to look at the tactical displays showing the ongoing liberation operations. "The choice is simple. They can surrender unconditionally and face justice for their crimes, or they can be destroyed completely. But they will never again threaten innocent species." The hegemony's response came 12 hours later. Instead of accepting surrender terms, they launched a desperate counterattack against the Confederation core worlds, hoping to force a negotiated settlement by threatening civilian populations. It was their final mistake. Human forces intercepted the hegemony fleet before it could reach its targets, and the resulting battle lasted less than 4 hours. The entire enemy force was either destroyed or captured, and the hegemony's ability to conduct offensive operations was permanently ended. "Admiral Kethmore," Admiral Chen said as the last enemy ship surrendered, "I think it's time to discuss the post-war galaxy, because whether they formally surrender or not, the hegemony as a military threat is finished." As Admiral Kethmore looked at the tactical displays showing liberated systems throughout former hegemony territory, he realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The age of passive defense and diplomatic solutions was ending. In its place, a new order was emerging, one where freedom would be actively defended by those willing to fight for it. And at the center of that new order stood humanity, a species that had turned warfare into a science and used it to save civilizations instead of conquering them. 3 years after the end of the Hegemony War, Ambassador Vextai stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of New Geneva Station, watching delegates from over 200 species take their seats for the annual Galactic Alliance Summit. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built with human construction techniques but incorporating architectural elements from dozens of different worlds. The Galactic Confederation had evolved into something stronger, the Galactic Alliance. The change wasn't just in name. Where the Confederation had focused on peaceful coexistence among member worlds, the Alliance was dedicated to actively protecting freedom throughout the galaxy. "The session will come to order," announced Admiral Chen, now serving as the Alliance's Director of Strategic Defense. She had traded her military uniform for civilian clothes, but her bearing still suggested someone ready to fight at a moment's notice. The first item on the agenda was the integration report for the former Hegemony territories. Dr. Thexan, now the Alliance's Director of Liberation Operations, stood to address the assembly. "Ladies, gentlemen, and respected entities," he began, "I'm pleased to report that the liberation of former Hegemony worlds continues ahead of schedule. 147 systems have been successfully integrated into the Alliance, with full democratic governments established on 89 worlds. The statistics were impressive, but Ambassador Vexistai knew the real story was more complex. The process of rebuilding entire civilizations after decades or centuries of slavery wasn't something that could be measured in simple numbers." "What about the species that were considered extinct?" asked Representative Koltar of the Zentari Assembly. "Remarkable recoveries," Dr. Thexan replied. 23 species that we thought had been completely destroyed have surviving populations that were hidden in slave camps or remote colonies. The Vorthak alone have over 2 million survivors scattered across 30 different worlds." Admiral Kethmore, now serving as the Alliance's chief military advisor, stood to add his perspective. "The integration process has been accelerated by human military doctrine. Instead of occupying former Hegemony worlds, human forces established security perimeters and then immediately began training local defense forces. The concept had been revolutionary. Previous galactic civilizations would have established military governments in conquered territory, leading to resentment and eventual rebellion. Humans had done something different. They had turned former enemies into allies by giving them the tools to defend themselves. The numbers speak for themselves," Admiral Kethmore continued. 47 former Hegemony worlds now contribute ships and personnel to Alliance defense forces. Species that were enslaved just 3 years ago are now active partners in maintaining galactic security. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. "The principle is simple. People fight harder for their own freedom than they do for someone else's empire. By helping liberated species defend themselves, we've created a network of mutual defense that's stronger than any single military force." But the real test of the new galactic order had come 6 months earlier, when long-range sensors detected massive fleets moving in the galactic outer rim. Species that had remained hidden during the Hegemony's reign of terror, now emerging to test the strength of the Alliance. Captain Yilara, now serving as the Alliance's Director of First Contact Operations, stood to address that situation. "The emergence of the Void Fleet Confederacy has created new challenges for our expansion efforts. These are species that survived the Hegemony by becoming militaristic isolationists. They view our liberation operations as potential threats to their security. The Void Fleet had approached Alliance territory with over 3,000 ships, demanding that human forces withdraw from the Outer Rim. It had been a tense confrontation that could have led to another galactic war. "How was the situation resolved?" asked Representative Naldrex of the Crystalline Assembly. Captain Yilara smiled. "With typical human pragmatism. Instead of treating the Void Fleet as enemies, Admiral Chen invited their leadership to observe Alliance liberation operations in action. The solution had been elegant in its simplicity. The Void Fleet commanders, expecting to find an aggressive, human empire, instead witnessed the systematic liberation of slave worlds and the establishment of democratic governments. They saw former enemies become allies, and oppressed populations become partners. The result," Captain Yilara continued, "is that the Void Fleet Confederacy has requested associate membership in the Alliance. They're contributing ships and personnel to our border defense forces in exchange for technological assistance and trade agreements. Ambassador Vexitai reflected on how much had changed since that first folklore symposium where she had discussed human myths. The humans had proven to be everything the legends claimed and nothing like what anyone had expected. "If I may address the assembly," she said, standing from her seat. The hall fell quiet as delegates turned to listen. 3 years ago, I gave a presentation on human mythology to the Confederation Council. I described stories about a warrior species that could turn anything into a weapon and treated war as a science. She paused, looking around the assembly hall at the incredible diversity of species now working together. I was wrong about almost everything. Humans aren't warriors by nature, they're protectors by choice. They don't love war, they're simply willing to fight when fighting is necessary to protect others. She activated a holographic display that showed the current Alliance territory, where the old Confederation had controlled perhaps 30% of habitable systems. The Alliance now protected, or had defensive agreements, with over 70% of known civilizations. The human approach to conflict resolution is fundamentally different from anything we've seen before, she continued. Instead of avoiding war, they prepare for it so thoroughly that potential enemies choose peace instead. Instead of conquering territory, they liberate populations and help them become self-governing allies. Admiral Chen stood to respond. Ambassador, Vexitai is correct about our approach, but she's missing a crucial point. Everything we've accomplished has been possible only because of the partnership between human military capabilities and Confederation diplomatic expertise. She gestured to the diverse assembly of delegates. Humans are good at fighting, but we're not particularly good at building the kind of peaceful society that makes fighting unnecessary. That's where our alien partners excel. You've taught us that victory in war is meaningless without a just peace afterward. The comment sparked a general discussion about the nature of the human-alien partnership that had become the foundation of the Alliance. Species that had been pacifistic for centuries were learning basic military strategy, while humans were studying alien approaches to conflict resolution and social organization. The most interesting development, observed Dr. Thexon, is the emergence of hybrid doctrines, Althari diplomatic protocols combined with human threat assessment procedures, Zentari logistics systems integrated with human tactical flexibility. We're seeing the evolution of entirely new approaches to interspecies cooperation. Representative Koltar raised a concern that had been troubling many of the newer Alliance members. But what happens when we encounter species that can't be negotiated with or liberated? Not everyone will respond to our combination of diplomatic and military pressure. Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Then we'll deal with them using whatever methods are necessary to protect innocent populations. The Alliance has made a commitment to defend freedom throughout the galaxy. We won't abandon that commitment just because it becomes difficult or dangerous. The statement was met with approving sounds from throughout the assembly. The species that had joined the Alliance understood that their security depended on the willingness of others to fight for shared values. As the formal session concluded, Ambassador Vexitai found herself standing at one of the station's observation windows, looking out at the Alliance fleet patrolling the system. The ships were no longer purely human designs. They incorporated technologies and aesthetic elements from dozens of different species. A young Althari officer approached her. Lieutenant Kexival had grown up during the war years and now served aboard the human flagship Indomitable as part of the Alliance's integrated crew exchange program. Ambassador, she said, my grandmother asked me to give you a message. She wanted to thank you for your folklore presentation 3 years ago. Ambassador Vexitai was confused. Thank me, but I was wrong about almost everything. That's exactly what she wanted to thank you for, Lieutenant Kexival replied. She said that if you had been right about humans being mythical warriors, the galaxy would have been conquered by the Hegemony. But because you were wrong, because humans turned out to be ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things when others needed protection, millions of beings are alive and free today. The lieutenant paused, looking out at the diverse fleet protecting the station. Grandmother says the most important thing about myths is knowing when to stop believing in them and start believing in something better. As Ambassador Vexitai watched, the mixed fleet of human and alien vessels conduct their patrol operations. She understood what the young officer meant. The myths about humanity had been both completely wrong and absolutely correct. Humans weren't legendary warriors. They were something much more valuable. They were ordinary people who became extraordinary when others needed them to be. In the distance, Earth hung in space like a small blue marble, no longer the source of myths but the symbol of a simple truth. Sometimes the best way to preserve peace is to be very, very good at war, and the best way to win a war is to make sure your former enemies become your future allies. The age of human mythology was over. The age of human partnership with the galaxy had begun. Admiral Chen joined Ambassador Vextai at the observation window, looking out at the fleet that now included ships from over 50 different species. "Any regrets about how things turned out?" she asked. Ambassador Vextai smiled. "Only that it took us so long to realize that the best myths are the ones that turn out to be better than true." In the depths of space, automated sensor stations continued their silent watch over unexplored regions of the galaxy. The readings they transmitted showed new energy signatures, unknown ship designs, and evidence of civilizations that had not yet been contacted by the Alliance. But for the first time in galactic history, those unknowns didn't represent threats to be feared or ignored. They represented opportunities for new partnerships, new alliances, and new species to join the growing community of free civilizations. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was no longer full of myths. Instead, it was full of possibilities, protected by the simple principle that when good people decide something is worth fighting for, that something tends to stay protected. And in a universe where freedom was actively defended by those willing to fight for it, even the most dangerous myths could become the foundation for the most peaceful reality.